First Holmes was born, then he got fat, bald, and tired. Sup Holmes?
Beware, your host, Jonathan Holmes.
Crap, I'm all so underprepared this week. The Pokemon really got under my skin. Have you played any of the new Pokemon, Ryan Vandendyck, right? That's how I pronounced it?
Vandendyck, yeah.
Vandendyck, got it.
No, I haven't played anything. I'm looking forward to it. That'll probably be like Christmas. I'll pick it up and sit down and really spend some hours with it.
Yeah, it's a time sink. It's a turn-based RPG, which you know something about, but you're busy making a turn-based RPG right now. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, hard to find time to play them when you're also making them. It's the bitter irony, I guess.
Yeah, indeed. That game is called Citizens of Earth, and we'll talk about that as we get into it. But for people who don't know, who are you, Ryan Vandendyck?
Yes, well, that's my name, Ryan Vandendyck. I'm the founder of Eden Industries, which is an indie developer located in Vancouver, Canada. Citizens of Earth we're working on now is our second game. Our first game we released last year on Steam is called Waveform. And prior to that, I worked with Next Level Games. You might know them from working on things like Luigi's Mansion, Dark Moon, Punch-Out, Mario Strikers. And kind of in between all that, I also worked for Silicon Knights, which is a little you might recognize as well for their notoriety.
Sure. What did you work on over there?
So for a year I worked on a game that never got shipped. If you kind of followed all of that drama, it was called The Box or The Ritualist at different times. It was kind of this open world sandbox kind of horror thriller. If you kind of picture an open world Alan Wake is kind of sort of what it was. But yeah, I worked on that for a year, and then it kind of went through a couple publishers, finally got canceled. And then I was on X-Men Destiny for about 6 months. Kind of saw the writing on the wall with that game, and pieced out of there. So that's kind of how that all went.
That's a bummer about the Ritual / The Box. That sounds really interesting. Open world Alan Wake sounds very ambitious, sounds very promising. What went wrong there? I'm pre-depressed about never having played it.
Yeah, it had a lot of promise. I think part of the issue was sort of a lack of focus of kind of regarding the real core meat gameplay of the game. So we had a big world you could explore. A lot of the mechanics in the game were done, but just there wasn't a really strong idea of what the player was doing, kind of moment to moment. So without that kind of core gameplay, it was sort of just kind of a barren world full of nice things to look at, but there wasn't a lot to do. And then kind of as a result of that, there was constantly an effort to try to kind of refocus and figure out what was fun. And as it is sometimes, we were sort of focused and distilled down the game to kind of a core essence, but it almost kept making the game smaller and smaller and smaller, kind of paring away what wasn't needed, until eventually all we had left was like one room of gameplay. Everything else was kind of cut away. And
interesting. Was there one central head on this game that maintained throughout the project, or did it change directors as time was going on?
It changed directors a couple times, and then at the same time that was going on, Too Human was being developed, and Too Human was definitely sort of more, I think, the focus of the company. So this game kind of didn't quite have as much, I guess, attention or concern in a lot of ways, and it did go through a number of directors, and as any project like that, I mean, you can expect a lot of turbulence. So
sure, absolutely. This isn't the game that was once going to be published by Gamecock called The Box, was it?
I don't think so. I don't know of any Gamecock participation in this game. So.
That was a long time ago. That was like 2008. Around when were you working on that game?
Yeah, it was the whole of 2008, from start to finish. Yeah.
I think that was the Gamecock one, where it was like Pandora's box had opened, and you're running around dealing with all the monsters that come out of that, and it's like an apocalyptic. Or is that a different The Box?
I don't think Pandora's box featured into it.
Huh.
But, I mean, that does sound kind of similar, but I was not aware of Gamecock being involved at all. It was, different publishers, a couple of them that we kind of went through, but as far as I know, there was no Gamecock in the mix. But I don't know.
Oh, Gamecock. They're Devolver Digital now, which at least some people from Gamecock, and they're doing very well. They had to go through different directors and different forms, and are now coming out on top, which is nice to see. But more about you. What did you do? What was your first job in the industry, and what game was it?
So my first job, actually, I was still in school when I got it. It was sort of a co-op job through my university, and that was with Next Level Games. So I was there. It was supposed to be only 4 months, and I was working on Mario Strikers Charged on the Wii. But they really liked me, and so they kept me on for a whole year. And then I went from Mario Strikers to Spider-Man Friend or Foe, which is not quite as good a game as Mario Strikers was, but it was a really good learning experience. In that game, I did like all of this, the special moves for all of the superheroes, and for a budding student game developer, that was a really cool opportunity. So.
Was that the Wii version only, or the? I'm trying to recall.
It was Wii, PS2, Xbox 360. But at the time, I'm a pretty big Nintendo fanboy, I guess, at the time, especially with the Wii. So I forced them to let me implement all of the Wii controls in that game.
Oh yeah.
Which they're not very impressive. I wouldn't brag about them, but it was kind of a fun thing to do. Again, just as a student, and I was passionate about it, so that was fun.
Yeah, that's awesome. How did it feel as a student to have already worked on a Mario game, or at least a Mario spin-off, and then Spider-Man right after that? Those are pretty big names to get right in the industry.
Yeah, it was an amazing opportunity. Super thankful for it. And then after that was done, I went back to school, and I was supposed to spend another year and a half or something. But I was like, I gotta get out of here. So I did one more term. And then actually went to Silicon Knights and just finished my degree kind of remotely while I worked at Silicon Knights. Just keep making games. So.
Oh, awesome! And I didn't ask, what did you do on the box for working there?
Yeah, on that game I was actually a game designer. So I was designing combat and the story levels, hooking all that up, and the kind of much more designer player experience rather than a programmer that I was doing at Next Level.
Ah, gotcha. And did that make it sting all the more when the game didn't end up getting a publisher and shipping? Because it sounds like already you've got games that you feel more attached to and more involved with, and others that you're a little bit less feeling a kinship with, or feeling like ownership of.
Yeah, with that game, the box or the ritualist or whatever you want to call it, it was a weird experience because that was the first game that I had worked on as a game designer as opposed to a programmer, which was very fun. But it's kind of a bittersweet thing. There was a lot about that game that was really cool, and I think would have really surprised and kind of delighted players in ways that they had never really experienced before. But at the same time, it was a really huge uphill battle every day trying to, kind of put that passion and quality into the game. And if you've heard any stories of Silicon Knights, there's a lot of horror stories about what that environment was like, and they're pretty much, it's true. So, when it kind of all fell apart, it was unfortunate in the sense there was something there that was really good, and I'd spent a year in it, but some people had spent 3 or 4 years on it. And, so to see it all kind of fall apart was really sad, but sometimes it's just the way it goes. If you can't get something really quality, it's probably better to just let it go than force something that's subpar out there.
Yeah, absolutely. Having the opportunity to look back on it, let's just say theoretically, and I don't expect you to have all the answers, but I can't help but be interested in what you will have to say about this. If knowing what you know now, you could go back and just be the boss and be like, all right, here's what we need to do to get this game out there. Here's how we need to pare down the team. This is how we need to focus. What do you think you would have done looking back if you had all that control to make sure the game ended up getting made?
I think the number one thing would have just been really uniting the team around the game. And the way it worked there was, it was really weird. All the departments were so segregated that they almost operated in isolation. We would just, be making levels, and suddenly, new sound effects would be in the game, or new art that we didn't know was coming, or new features. And it's that's not the way to make a game. You need to have the team united around an idea. So certainly, just I don't quite know exactly how I would do it given the culture there, but bringing the team together and having everyone believing in the vision, on board with that idea, I think would certainly be number one. There was a lot of talented people there, and I think just having them all working towards the same goal was really, I think, what would have done it. That would have been enough, I think.
Interesting. I imagine making a game like that is a little bit like being an actor and suddenly having your set change, like all of a sudden. You're trying to get used to how you're going to say your lines, what your motivations are given your setting, and all of a sudden your lines change, and your setting changes, and your co-star changes, and then everything changes while you're still trying to be a convincing actor. It must really throw you off. That's how it must feel if you're working on one enemy design and all of a sudden the whole scenario changes, or the sound effect change, or everything gets pared down to one room. I still can't believe, what was that room like in that game? Was that like the best room in any video game ever? Like an entire game in one room?
Well, we had like, it was like sort of this back alley where we'd have, enemies spawn in. It was like sort of a test bed for, combat and interaction with all of like your kind of superpowers you had. So there was a lot of really cool stuff in that room, but again, the problem was like, how do we take a room of enemies and make a whole open world, a huge sandbox experience out of it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can only imagine. Was your experiences at Silicon Knights, did that at all spur you to want to start your own small studio where everyone can be communicating easily and have direction all at one time, as opposed to that's kind of scattershot, separate teams attitude that was at Silicon Knights?
Yeah, it was, Silicon Knights had a lot of problems, but I'm still, very thankful for the opportunity. Again, it was the first design role I had in the industry, so that was a great learning experience. And I think, between, the design role there and the programming at Next Level Games, it really, equipped me in a lot of ways to go on my own and sort of tackle a lot of the programming and design and sort of wearing a lot of those hats you have to do as an independent developer. And certainly, seeing the problems, I mean, there's problems everywhere, and so seeing the problems at Silicon Knights definitely made me want to do things a different way. Even the problems at Next Level Games made me want to do things a different way, and certainly that has really informed a lot of the way I try to make games, absolutely.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. How has it been so far, comparing being out on your own to working, a day job with a salary and a tight constraint on what you have control over, but also a tight constraint on what you have responsibility for? How would you say those two experiences have compared thus far?
Going on your own and making games, I would say, is kind of like skydiving. It's really fun, but I mean, it's really scary too. And if you make a wrong move, you might slam into the ground. It's great having creative control at the end of the day. I mean, certainly with Waveform I tried to do something very unique, and Citizens of Earth again, try to take things in a pretty cool direction that I'm personally passionate about, and that feeling, that power, that creative control is amazing. And having people play the games and really like it, I mean, that's really unlike any other feeling. It's having people really enjoy your creativity and your passion. That's amazing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, and then but at the same time, it's like when I was working, either Next Level or Silicon Knights, not only did I get paid, which was nice, but in some sense too, you have a little box that you work in, and you can just be like, well, this is my area. I'm going to make this amazing. And at the end of the day, you just have to have faith that other people are doing the same thing, and then someone's kind of guiding that train. Whereas as an independent developer, there's so many things that there's no one to do them because there's not that many people. So I mean, I have like zero art ability, but I make all the particle effects in Waveform and Citizens of Earth. It's because there's no one else to do it. Or I have to make our trailer, or make our I mean, the kind of list goes on. Anything that would fall through the cracks that normally you'd have someone available to do, or money to pay someone to do, it's like that pretty much just falls on me. So it's certainly a lot of work. But at the end of the day, it's a really great feeling to be able to kind of make something that's your own and share it with the world.
And I imagine that the closeness you feel with the people who appreciate it is all the more intense because you when they like the trailer, you're like, not only did I make that game, I made that trailer, and they're like, awesome trailer, dude. And you're like, oh,
yeah.
So, it must feel fantastic. For people that don't know, Citizens of Earth is a game you've been working on for years now. I think I first heard about it in 2011. Does that sound right?
I think that's probably a bit early, but no, I think the main development began shortly after we shipped Waveform, which was last March.
Okay.
Yeah, it's kind of ramping up. Probably May was sort of big development. But actually, I had the idea for it before Waveform. I just didn't think I'd be able to make it. Like, it's a much bigger game than Waveform, so I thought I'd kind of just shelve that one for a bit. But then once we were finished Waveform, I was kind of talking to the team and what to work on next. And I have dozens of ideas written down, and I just kind of showed them to the team, like, what do you think is good? And everyone just picked this one and said, that one sounds really good. I want to work on that. And started working on it about a year and a half ago, I guess.
Huh. And for people who don't know, how would you sum up Citizens of Earth in terms of the premise and the gameplay? Like, how did you pitch it to the rest of the team at Eden Industries?
I mean, so the very first pitch was it's a modern setting for an RPG, which is reasonably uncommon, mostly fantasy, sci-fi type things. So it's a modern setting where you recruit everybody. All the NPCs are the heroes. You recruit everyone, and so as a result, like, all the heroes are just regular people. So modern setting, recruit everyone. Regular people are the heroes, and that was sort of the initial idea. And kind of following that, we had the idea of the main character as the vice president of the world, kind of this bureaucrat that just orders people around, and that seemed to fit with the idea of regular people kind of fighting your battles for you. And certainly Earthbound was a strong influence, again, in terms of the modern setting and the tone. And yeah, I mean, like, having the character as a vice president of the world, I think it lends itself well to sort of comedy, humor, satires type things, so that sort of influenced a lot of the tone. And yeah, kind of snowballed from there, but really all starting with the idea of, what would an RPG be like if you played all of this the regular people and they were the heroes?
It gives me a little bit of the same feeling I got from Retro City Rampage when I first played it, which is also made by a handsome young Canadian man. You know Brian Vandendyck, actually?
Oh, yeah, he's from Vancouver as well, so yeah, we see each other now and again, yeah.
You guys could practically be related with those cool haircuts and
the
smiling and everything. And he's got a lot of similar comedic elements where, with Brian, I always felt like Brian was always so close to big culture stuff because he'd worked on a lot of big games, as have you, and had a lot of pent-up creativity that he didn't get to express on all the games he worked on, and also pent-up light, kind-hearted jabs at American culture in particular. And I've already seen a little bit of that in Earth. Do you think those parallels ring true?
I think it's actually a pretty good comparison. We had a very similar, experience going through, mainstream studios for a long time, kind of getting a taste for that, honing our skills, and then kind of just, saving up our money from that and just diving in the deep end, making your own game. And yeah, I think it's a pretty fair comparison, I think. And I know I'm very flattered to have that comparison. Brian's a great guy, so.
Absolutely. This game's on sale right now. If you guys are listening, it's cheap. You should go check it out. And I'm in the game, so I'm also.
There we go. Perfect. Yeah.
Did you ever think of pitching Citizens of Earth to Silicon Knights, Next Level, whoever you had been working on at the time when you first had the idea?
Well, so at Silicon Knights, I guess they were. I guess that's defunct now. They were very controlling of people's ideas outside of work, which is basically the norm in most video game companies. They really you have a contract saying, like, anything you come up with outside of work belongs to us, right? That's standard contract. I feel like Silicon Knights took it a bit further. I heard stories. I don't know. People wanted to have like a garage band and sell their CD, and they were told no, they can't do that, and weird things like that. It would seem really unrelated, but I mean, it's pretty common. Even at Next Level, when I went back there, I did get it in my contract that I could work on games, sort of in my spare time, which was very nice of them. And at a certain point, we were talking about sort of a partnership on Waveform, but didn't really, it didn't really materialize, didn't really go anywhere. So yeah, so for Citizens of Earth, I kind of just said, all right, kind of Silicon Knights was gone. Next Level, not quite receptive, so
sure.
On, yeah.
I imagine it would have been an uphill battle, especially given that it would have been an interesting pairing, though, because Next Level has worked on a lot of Nintendo franchises. Citizens of Earth is influenced by Earthbound, but Earthbound, up until recently, has been kind of the black sheep in the back of, it's like way in the back of Nintendo's basement until it just saw re-released on the Wii U and was sold really well. And so how has that been for you as an Earthbound fan to see the way attitudes of Earthbound?
It's funny because working with people at Next Level, and even people might forget, but Silicon Knights had a very close relationship with Nintendo for a long time too, on Eternal Darkness and stuff. So there's a lot of people there that had worked closely with Nintendo, and I got a lot of stories of people who had worked. One guy, he had worked on Earthbound as part of the translation team. I can't remember the name of their team, the Treehouse or something they have there.
That's right.
Yeah, so he had worked. That was his first game in the industry. He worked on as part of that team, and so he had crazy stories about that and how Nintendo was pretty upset when the game did not sell very well, and especially Nintendo of America was very skeptical about wanting anything to do with that series in the future. Compared to Nintendo Japan, obviously was a little more. They released Mother 3. But so it's interesting seeing, kind of the behind the scenes of a lot of that.
I'd imagine. And how did it feel for you when Earthbound did so well recently on the Wii U, knowing that you're working on a game that shares a lot of the same sensibilities and even has Earth in the name, just like Earthbound?
Mm-hmm. I think it's great. I mean, Earthbound, I think is an amazing game, and obviously, over the last decades, it has gained a bit of a cult following. But I always thought it deserved much more acclaim than what it originally had received. So, now it's having a bit of resurgence on the Wii U. It's fantastic, and it's great to see that people still love it and still kind of want more of it, which is good because I'm making a game that is similar in some ways. So hopefully they'll want Citizens of Earth too.
Yeah, I hope so too. First time around, I remember when Earthbound first came out. I think I'm a little older than you, so I might remember it more distinctly when people are trying to pitch a game where you go shopping for yo-yos and get in a fight with a street sign, and people are like, it was so foreign, and I worry that Citizens of Earth will suffer the same sort of, people won't have enough of a frame of reference for what it is, so they won't give it a shot. Has that ever been a concern for you, that people aren't going to immediately get what your game's about?
Yeah, it's a concern. I think your memory of Earthbound is pretty spot on. I remember that people a hero as a young kid with a baseball cap, having a yo-yo. Compared to the time, you could play Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy, those were much more RPGs people really were talking about wanting to play. And I do think Citizens of Earth does have a bit. I've seen comments people say I don't want to play as politician. I hate politicians. Politicians are ruining the country. And I'm like, well, that's kind of the joke, But I think there is an element to that. But I guess even with Waveform and with this, I really like making games that are just kind of new experiences. And maybe at some point it won't be financially viable for me to do that anymore. But for now, it's been great, and I just love it when people pick it up and play it, and it just has that refreshing feeling of things they're just not used to playing. To me, that as a creator, that's great. So.
Absolutely, and people, from what I've seen, the response from the demo has been really strong. I've seen a lot of Let's Plays with it, with big, smiling, happy faces, a beautiful woman being like, "I love it," about which is got to be pretty great for you to see that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So far, the response to the demo has been, almost unanimously, overwhelmingly positive. Certainly no one has really, that I've heard said, oh, I don't really like it, not for me. Usually it's, this is amazing. It's, and it's, it's funny and it's fun and it's, refreshing and new and, obviously I'm very biased, but certainly, people have been saying some really great things, Let's Plays and, articles been written hands-on and it's been amazing so far and, so I really hope that people, once they play it and they get a chance to kind of dive in for themselves, that they'll fall in love with it. That's certainly the hope.
Absolutely. You should spread it around too. It's free. Send it to your friends. Play it. Does it have controller support, or is it mouse and click?
Right now, it's kind of mouse keyboard. We're definitely going to add controller support. It's it's funny. It's one of those things. It's we're such a small team that we kind of have to throw our weight in one direction and then the other. So sometimes it's oh well, do we have this new feature, this new thing, or controller support's always kind of on the list, but somehow it never bubbled to the top yet. So it's coming. It's coming.
But you did add Earthbound-style backgrounds to the battles, I noticed, or at least the option for it.
Yeah, well, it was something that I had implemented must have been like a year ago, just as something kind of fun. And, I showed some people, like, my wife and others, and they're like, what is this? Like, this is so weird. Because I think unless you've played Earthbound, it just seems like an acid trip or something. Like, it just seems totally out of the blue. But, yeah, now that, I'm showing off the game a bit more and Earthbound fans are playing the demo, it's one thing they really asked for is, oh, I really wanted to see Earthbound-style background. So I kind of re-added it back into the game as an option you can select. And, yeah, it's kind of fun as a nostalgia thing and for people who like it. But for those that don't, kind of get the joke, it's okay. They got the other backgrounds, too.
Oh, interesting. So you're covering all the bases. I did, before we move on too far into Citizens of Earth, and we'll definitely come back to it, what was it like working on Luigi's Mansion 2, or Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon? Because that was such a interesting project, and it came out at such an interesting time in the 3DS's lifespan where it hadn't kind of picked up steam as much as some people had hoped, but people are getting the sense it may have a resurgence. I don't think Monster Hunter was out for it yet, and it was the bringing back this GameCube game that the people who like it absolutely love it, but your average didn't have the same sort of instant Mario sales potential that like maybe Mario Strikers had. So what was that experience like being behind the scenes on that game?
It was crazy. I mean, so first of all, I think before the 3DS was announced, I think Next Level started working with the dev kits for it. And it was such a secret that only like 6 people that were working on it knew what it was. The rest of the company was in the dark, which is pretty uncommon. Usually, like, everyone in the company would know. But yeah, Nintendo required a separate like NDA, non-disclosure agreement for those 6 people, and they worked in a little special room, and they couldn't announce anything. So that was pretty funny. So even when so finally the 3DS was announced, and the rest of the company found out about it the same way everyone else did. And but still, we didn't know anything about Luigi's Mansion. But I think given the secrecy, we kind of all thought, well, probably they're working on a 3DS game. Like, why else would Nintendo be so secretive? And so at the time, I was working on Ghost Recon for the Wii.
All right.
And then that game finished up, and I remember me and another gameplay programmer were called into a little room and said, okay, we want you guys to join the big secret project. And he said, and it's Luigi's Mansion 2. And I was like, yes, that was great. So to me, like, I love, Luigi's Mansion was great, and again, it was working on another cool property like Luigi was just amazing. So that was really cool, and yeah, we got ushered up into the secret room. I think the very first day, I bricked the 3DS dev kit. So I did the firmware update wrong. But yeah, it was great. We jumped in, and it was pretty early at that point. We joined up, and it was really cool. And at the time, again, it was still very secret, and the rest of the company still didn't know, not for a while yet. That was really crazy. And so finally, Miyamoto-san came to the studio to talk to us, through a translator, I guess. And that was the first time he'd ever been to Canada, which is pretty cool. And it's funny because, like you said, Luigi's Mansion, a lot of people like it, but it didn't set the world on fire. So Miyamoto-san talking about making this game, his kind of big thing was, well, I wanted to make it, and therefore we're now making it. And obviously he knows what he's doing. I mean, because the game was very successful and very well received, so clearly he was right. But it's just sort of funny to think of him, I don't know, back in Japan, just like, I want to make Luigi's Mansion 2, and just having the power to push that through, it's crazy. So it's certainly a lot of really bizarre kind of situations surrounded the development, but it was a lot of fun, and obviously, people are loving it, so it was great.
Yeah, I'm so glad. I was one of those people, and I think it was maybe people like me in the game press who were passionate about games for long enough to like that kind of niche game even when it first came out, and to hold on to it. The press responded to it really strongly, and people who maybe weren't around for the GameCube days or didn't have a GameCube back then hopefully took our word for it, and maybe that helped a little bit. But I want to talk a little bit more about Miyamoto, because I think I've always guessed that was what he was like, that he is in a position where he can just be like, Urban Champion 3D Classics. Yeah. We're doing it, and people are like, nobody likes Urban Champion. He's like, we're doing it, and then they just do it. They like Pikmin 3. Nobody really liked Pikmin 1. Well, people liked it. I loved it, but it didn't that's not like a console launcher in a lot of people's minds. They think like we need to get Grand Theft Auto or blah blah blah, or But he's like, no, Pikmin 3. We'll do that. We'll work hard on that. And then it comes out and it's amazing, critical acclaim and whatnot. And with Luigi's Mansion 2, it sounded like it was a similar thing. Did you really get the sense that he had that much control over what games they would put out?
Yeah, it certainly seemed like that. I mean, most of the project we were working with a couple other guys, for the day-to-day stuff, right? Miyamoto would sort of weigh in on the big stuff. But certainly it seemed, like he was definitely kind of the mover and shaker at Nintendo for a lot of what got made. And I mean, it's easy to understand why. I mean, he makes great games and he's got a lot of kind of good sense for what people like, even if people don't know it themselves sometimes.
Yeah, that's a good point. But do you think that he was thinking a lot about what people are going to like or not like, or did he just kind of follow his instincts about what made for a good game and went off that confidence of years of success and expertise?
I mean, I think it's almost kind of one and the same. Like, I think his expertise, his skill is knowing what people like and making really fun games that resonate with people. And he's been doing it for so long. I think it's almost to the point where I don't think he says I'm going to sit down and make a game people like. I think he says I'm just going to apply myself, my experience, my knowledge, my skill to this, and the sense of it's what people like playing. I think it just kind of comes through, from who he is.
Absolutely, I imagine for him that it's almost like a lead guitarist who just knows how to improvise a lot of the time, or a songwriter that just sits down and lets the right thing come out and knows how to edit what they're doing. So there's all these sadder stories I hear that he's really guided by the shareholders and can't do whatever he wants. And it doesn't sound like you saw any of that side of things.
I'm sure there is some of that, but I mean, I think Luigi's Mansion is a perfect example of that. It's certainly not the be-all and end-all. I mean, if the shareholders were voting on every game they released, they never would have picked Luigi's Mansion, Dark Moon, I'm sure. So I think, Miyamoto, had the vision, had the sense that it was the right time for a sequel, I guess, and he was right. And I guess sometimes you just gotta believe the people that are, doing the work and have been doing it for so long,
Absolutely. It sounds like you've taken that way of thinking too and are applying it to Citizens of Earth. It's not like, wow, this is what's so hot right now, turn-based RPGs about politicians, but you have the feeling for it, and it's fun, and it's funny, so you're knowing people are going to catch up when they actually check it out. I think they will too. Was there any vision you had? Like, I like to imagine you imagining yourself as the boss. If you're like, if I could make Luigi's Mansion Dark Moon, what you would have done with it? Or did it pretty much go in the direction that you would have put it in if you could have decided?
I think, personally, there were things I would have done differently. One of my favorite things about the original was all of the, ghosts in the mansion. They're all doing their interesting thing, and you collect, the 50 of them or whatever it was, and they all have their own unique personalities, and they're kind of, each a little kind of mini boss in their own right. So that is kind of, absent from the Dark Moon game, and kind of all through development, I was really pushing for that, and trying to kind of incorporate that. But certainly, I mean, they obviously didn't listen, but maybe that's good. I mean, the game was very good, and I'm sure if it went a different way, I mean, I'm sure the game could have been great in a number of different ways, and they obviously went with a different kind of structure and a number of different mansions and all, and it worked out. People love it. The game is selling well, so. I think maybe it's good I wasn't in charge, or maybe I would have just made a good game in a different way. But I mean,
I'm sure it would have been great. It would have been great if you were in charge. But it turned out great as is, and a lot of that's because it just felt right. Like the mechanics were tight. It didn't take a lot to play it. You didn't have to learn a ton of different mechanics, but you had the core mechanics that you could expand upon in a lot of different ways, and it looked beautiful. It had that next level polish and that easy to learn, hard to master. And you had a lot to do with the way the gameplay actually ended up feeling. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. My main responsibility there was the AI for all of the ghosts. So basically, all the behavior of all the ghosts in the game. how they move and attack. Certainly, I was working obviously with a designer and an animator to get the movements feeling good, but yeah, I mean the way they act and behave, I programmed all of that and some of the bosses as well, and it was great. I mean, Nintendo has a way of doing things where it's like you said, it's kind of like easy to learn but hard to master, and I think that kind of embodies a lot of their enemies too. In games, like you see an enemy and they kind of have like their one unique characteristic, and generally kind of the one way to beat them a lot of ways. But it's fun. It's straightforward, and the characters are interesting. And once you kind of figure it out, you feel good. And it's it's not like a huge, insanely deep AI neural network for each character. But it's always snappy, responsive characters that have a lot of personality, and just that tight gameplay. Like you kind of you never feel cheated as a player, even if it's challenging. You feel like, oh, I see what they did, and I can learn from it, and I can grow and get better. So it's simple, but it's deep, and it's really tight gameplay, and I think that's a real hallmark of Nintendo, and something that was really fun and informative to work on.
Absolutely, I can imagine. And did you have much responsibility for how the enemy difficulty was tiered? Because that's another thing I really liked about Dark Moon, is that it felt like how it escalated in terms of what I needed to learn how to do, and how difficult it was going to be to do it came together really well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, there were certainly a lot of kind of people involved in it. Like I said, I mean, there was myself implementing it. There was a number of designers figuring out how they were going to act. There was the level designers actually placing them in the levels and coming up with environments that fit their behavior and sort of what they did. And again, like a lot of credit I think goes to the animators. Like some of the ghosts have those great kind of like swooping punches, and it gives so much personality, but also it informs so much of how you play, because you see the wind up and you see the follow through, and you're like, now's my chance. So there and the audio as well. There's so many cool sound effect cues. So yeah, I think really there was a lot of people involved, and I'm sure I kind of put in my bit, as it were, and made sure it felt good when you had the game in your hands, and yeah, it really was an honor to be part of that, and just again work with these really talented people that brought the game to life in such a cool way.
Some of which you've taken with you, is that right? Eden Industries has a couple of people from Next Level, is that right?
Yeah. A couple people from Next Level, a couple people from Silicon Knights. So the other guy helping me design the game and do level design, Chris, he was one of the first designers on Luigi's Mansion, and had worked on a bunch of games there, doing design and level design. Denise, doing audio sound effects, she worked on Luigi's Mansion as well. And then kind of the interesting one is Scott, who did the music, doing the music for Citizens of Earth. He did the music for Waveform, and he's still working full time at Next Level Games.
Whoa!
So he's
Is he doing music for them too?
He actually does just sound effects there. He doesn't do music there. I think that's maybe why he likes doing music for these games on the side. He kind of stretches creativity in a different direction. So.
And they let him. They put it in the contract. You can.
So far, they let him. Yeah. So it's great. I mean, it certainly I think is a bit unique in the industry to really let people work on stuff outside of their main job. But personally, I think it's great. It lets employees really kind of stretch their creativity, and you learn so much that you wouldn't learn just kind of doing your same job all the time. So I think it's great, and it's fantastic they let me work. I did most of the development of Waveform while I was working there, and certainly them letting me do that, and Scott continue to work is very good of them. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And is somebody from Drinkbox also at Eden Industries? Is that right?
Kind of. I gotta be very careful how I.
Take your time.
So Andrew worked with me at Silicon Knights, and then later on he went to work at Drinkbox, where he is currently employed, but he is no longer working on Citizens of Earth because of contract stuff with Drinkbox. So that unfortunately kind of had to be, that relationship was severed. But because so he's now working at Drinkbox full time. We've kind of parted ways. Very thankful for his contribution, but unfortunately, there was no way to kind of bridge that going forward. So.
On Twitter, not that long ago, I was like, check this game out. It's made by people that worked on Luigi's Mansion and Guacamelee. I'm sorry. And somebody from Drinkbox was like, no, nobody from Drinkbox is on that game. And I was like, yeah, they are. Did I do that?
I don't know. Probably not. I wouldn't blame yourself. But it feels like I probably should not talk anymore about that situation. Suffice to say, yes, Andrew is not working on Citizens of Earth anymore. He was. We appreciate his contribution. He's now working full-time at Drinkbox. End of story.
The end. Yeah. You handled that like a true CEO. Personable, well-informed, but not overly indulgent in terms of the information. It's a great job. Very good. One of the things I've read about you that I was surprised to see, we talked about a little bit before the show, there was a Polygon article that was written, and Polygon takes a lot of really interesting angles, and I think that they're working very hard to expand how people look at video games instead of just the same big names that have big marketing behind them. They want to take some angles and things. One of the angles they wrote about was Christian gamers and Christian games.
Yeah. And
they went from everything to like the Left Behind games to like Binding of Isaac. And then you were in the middle of there with a really cool like 80s picture. It had like scan lines on it and stuff. It reminded me of Max Headroom. How did you end up in that article? And what was that about?
Yeah, as you might guess from my inclusion, I am Christian. And I make games, so I guess that qualified me for an article on Christian game developers. I guess I had just known someone who he's journalist for Game Church. It's a Christian perspective on games and journalism. So I had known him, and he put my name forward to the guy writing the article. To include me in that, it was great. It's a weird thing. There isn't a lot of Christian game developers, at least that I know. So it certainly is a bit of a unique kind of perspective to be in that industry. And it's also a way, in the article I was sort of expressing even though I'm a Christian making games, I don't necessarily want to make Christian games. You know what I mean? I kind of want to make good games, but still have, I think it's impossible for my games to not reflect who I am in a sense, but I want to make sure that, they're not come across as, preachy and this and that, which, I think, looking at Waveform and Citizens of Earth, I think they don't. But it's a very interesting thing, just being, Christian in a games industry and trying to kind of, bridge those worlds that often don't have a lot of overlap.
Absolutely. Do you have any thoughts on why they don't have a lot of overlap? Is it because people are afraid they're going to handle the subject incorrectly, or like you mentioned, they definitely don't want to be preachy if they care about the audience. They don't want to make the audience feel kind of talked to. They want to involve the audience. But it's been interesting to me that all these years, and video games have handled so many different subjects, that religion in general seems to continue to be kind of a taboo, and that Christianity in particular is, even though the majority of the country is some brand of Christian, that it's not really involved in the game industry all that much, from what I can tell.
Yeah, I think there's a couple things, I think, for me. Right off the bat, I think just, even from the perspective of storytelling, there's a lot of really great stuff in the Bible that could make a really cool game. Obviously, Binding of Isaac took, a kind of a bit and, went his own way with that, and there's really a ton. I think, there's always the tension, too, of, when you take something like religion, which, has such, a deep meaning for some people, you really need to be careful with how you, how you make it your own for a game. If you change things or twist things or make things more into it's kind of the same thing where people who make movies out of books, sometimes you change, you adapt things for the movie, and people who love the book are like, no, it's they destroyed it, right? I mean, take that, but take it to the extreme of people, for like their deeply personal religious beliefs. I mean, it's a whole other story. We're not talking about Harry Potter from book to movie. I mean, this is religion. This is the Bible. So I think there is an element of wanting to be very careful about how you portray it in a way that is still very true to the source material and is sort of honoring and respectful of that, and still make a good game and one that ideally can appeal to everyone in the sense of it being a fun game and telling a compelling story. So again, there's so you don't want to be preachy. You don't want to distort the source material. You still need to make a fun game, which is really hard to make a fun game. And you probably, have to have some either familiarity or interest in religion or the Bible or whatever particular religion. So I mean, that's kind of like, I guess, four opposing forces a lot of the time, and it's maybe hard to get all of them right to have that game that is fun and does all that in a fun and respectful and kind of way, I guess.
Huh. Huge challenge. Is it one that, when you talk about it, do you get the sense that at some point in your career you might want to try to take that challenge on after you'd felt like you built up your skills and gotten a sense of what works and what doesn't? Does that appeal to you at all to make that attempt?
Yeah, it does. Like, as I mentioned, I think there's a lot of really great stories in the Bible. Like like King David. David and Goliath is a story everyone knows, and like he did a lot of other pretty crazy stuff. And I think there's a lot in there that like lends itself like so well to a game. It would almost like be like almost easy for me in a sense, because so much of it, so much of the hard work is already done in telling this amazing story. But again, I think you do still have to be careful with the way you do it. And again, even making any game is a huge challenge. It can take a long time, a lot of money. So it certainly is something that I'm definitely open to, and I think would be a really cool thing. And especially with some of the stories, as you mentioned, that a lot of people are familiar with. So I think there's sort of that built-in, familiarity, and I think people could get a lot out of it. So it's something I'm open to, interested, but there's a lot of factors that go into making any game, let alone something like that.
I'd imagine it's public domain, I think, too, which helps. You wouldn't have to pay for the rights.
I would presume so. Yeah.
I hope so. The last interesting game I played about anything biblical was El Shaddai. I don't know if you ever played that.
I didn't play it, but I'm familiar with it. Yeah, I've seen videos and I've seen people play it. But
yeah, very, very interesting take on it. It was Lucifer before his fall from grace, and he looked like Travis Touchdown for No More Heroes. I have no idea why. And all the angels could turn into swans, and the Nephilim looked like they were made out of hot dogs. And he really, I don't know if he, it's a wonderful game, imagery-wise and theme-wise. Some of the gameplay was touch and go. But unfortunately, he didn't really capture this huge built-in audience that the Bible has. At least I imagine it has. If you were to make a game that adapted David and Goliath, for instance, would you imagine that you would have somewhat of an advantage that you're dealing with familiar material that people already have an attachment to and kind of an allegiance to? I would imagine churches and Bible studies could potentially use it in their curriculum and whatnot. It could be a really huge success in terms of crossover appeal.
Yeah, I mean, like El Shaddai is really interesting. I think they certainly made a very visually impressive game. And I guess they, it's interesting because they chose to base it on sort of the, what are called like the apocryphal works, which are kind of like, like the source is sort of like, a little more uncertain, and so people don't really consider it like as part of, canonizing the Bible. So anyway, he had a bit more freedom, I think, to kind of just go crazy with it, which obviously they kind of did in a lot of ways. And so maybe that's also why it didn't kind of get that audience, because again, most people wouldn't be familiar with the type of stuff that's in that game because it's kind of separate content. But I think, interestingly, I think there would be a lot of support, again, because of people's familiarity with it. But I think there is sort of this, I think there's always a tension with Christianity and pop culture, and maybe this is the case with other religions as well, but sometimes, they're slow on the uptake of, understanding exactly how, to respond to, to new developments developments in culture. And I think video games is one of those things, and it's kind of this ongoing issue about, whether, video games are good, or, I don't know, maybe they're, harmful, I guess. But I mean, that's also sort of a more broader discussion in society, I suppose. So I'm sure I'd get some people, that would be like, oh, okay, for Bible study today, let's play David and Goliath. And I'm sure I'd get other, large groups of people, whole churches saying like, oh, it's sacrilege, they can't make, how dare they make a video game out of the Bible? It trivializes it. I mean, and, I think, no matter what you do, you're going to get some people that think it's great and some people that, think it's horrible. So, I mean, I think despite that, it's still something I would still be interested in doing, but I would probably try to approach it with a bit more tact, I guess, than something that I'm just creating out of my own imagination.
Sure. I hadn't thought of it, and this shows how little I thought of it. Should have thought of this a lot more before I started talking about it. People are so attached to that material that if they see it done wrong in any way, that's not just like a story that means a lot to them. That's their whole faith.
That's exactly right.
Wow. Yeah, that could really backfire. I'd have to be very careful about that. Do you have the sense that that's why gaming and Christianity maybe hasn't crossed over more than it has? Because sadly, like you were saying, I feel like more and more in video game people, I hate to call it gamer, but the culture that's forming on the internet, the websites people read about video game news, the places people go to get a piece of that culture. There's more and more of an anti-mainstream, anti-traditional values, any of that, because it seems like most of the people who talk about video games in the mainstream are hostile towards video games. You've probably seen that clip with the preacher talking about Pokemon. As funny as it was, but that kind of painted a negative light about all Christians to that side of video game culture, and now I know a lot of people that are like, oh, I assume all Christians will hate me for playing Pokemon, so I'm not even going to talk to them about it. It's a weird way it's developed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I think the thing is, I mean, at the end of the day, I think it comes down to humanity, people are human. Some people are going to be extreme in their beliefs one way or the other, whether they're Christian or Jewish or Muslim or non-religious or anything, right? You have some people that are really temperate in the way they approach others, and some people that are really extreme. And I think it just again comes down to human nature. And so if you combine the extreme guy with he's a pastor, you're going to get him saying some crazy stuff. And if you get someone who's a very just temperate, conservative, moderate person that's a Muslim, and they might seem very different than some of the stuff we see on TV with, oh, they're extremists, right? Again, I think it just comes down to people, and some people are extreme, some people are moderate, and there's sometimes it's kind of thrust through these lenses of religion or anything really, I guess, in pop culture or otherwise, that sometimes paint large groups of people in ways that I think is really not representative. But you get, like I say, you get the one extreme guy up on his soapbox with the opportunity, and he's going to say something crazy. And one time it's going to be Christianity that's crazy, and one time it's going to be something else. But it comes down to just human nature, I think.
Sure. And then, sadly, the loudest voices, often the most extreme voices, are the ones that people use to paint that entire group. And I would love it if you became the new face of a Christian game developer, so people are like, oh, it's a nice, even-tempered guy with a good sense of humor who worked on Luigi's Mansion, is now making a slightly satirical RPG about recruiting everyday people to go beat up. What are they beating up at the demo? Are those protesters? They look a little hippie-ish.
There's some protesters at the start that you fight. There's some other kind of, if you go later, there's some weird animals, like the telephone. It's like a deer with a telephone for antlers, and another kind of just funny. It's a parody and seeing humor in almost everything. Again, coming from Canada, we like poking fun a little bit at Americans, as I'm sure Americans like poking fun at Canadians as well. We include a lot of the political kind of satire elements as well, and just other a lot of other things just about modern life that we think is funny, and just or taking something and putting a funny spin on it. So protesters, and there's some animals, and there's some other weird folks that there's like you go to a buffet and there's like a big, bunch of big obese guys like, mowing down, and they would thank you for food, and you got to fight them, and there's a lot of really crazy stuff like that, and that's everything's fair game. So
yeah. So and can you recruit any of the protesters or the obese guys later?
No. So the way we've kind of done it is like everyone in the game is either recruitable or fightable. So there's no like just NPC, right? You fight them or they're a party member. And some enemies you can talk to or fight, and it kind of blurs the line a little bit. But a lot of what we wanted to do too, as well, is make characters that are not just funny for the sake of being funny, but they really feel like an everyday hero, right? So you have the baker, and you have the school teacher, and there's a lifeguard, and whereas something kind of more generic like obese guy, it's like, well, what is he? Is he an obese like truck driver? Is he an obese firefighter? Like, I think we're more interested in just kind of getting to the core of what makes them, I don't know, just like that everyday hero, I guess, rather than just some physical descriptors, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. It sounds like you've got real people with real functions, so you get a sense of who they are in terms of what they do, whereas some of the enemies are a little bit more one-dimensional. And it's just like, oh, it's a jerk with a sign. It's that guy between me and the chicken fingers. I gotta beat him up, which makes sense. I think you might have the first African-American female cop that's playable in video game history, by the way.
Oh, really?
I think so.
We tried to do, it was a thing early on where, we're making a game called Citizens of Earth. We should make everyone on Earth playable, right? So we have people from every race, and we tried to do a lot of female characters as well, and just kind of, there are as many females in the world as males, maybe a little bit more, like, so they deserve a chance to show up in the game, and we tried to do it in a way that is, again, like it's real, like, so but still fun, like, the barista in the coffee shop is very peppy, but it's the kind of girl you might see if you go into Starbucks, like, we really wanted to avoid the bimbos and overly sexualized characters. Like, one, it's a cartoon, maybe that's a bit weird, but two, it's like, we want to make a game about everyday people as heroes, and I think that kind of weird stuff just didn't really fit the tone of the game.
Oh, absolutely. It glorifies things that we take for granted without, at least from what I've played so far, without falling into the same old tropes, which I think, as great as that is, that's one of the things that made me worry about the game, because that's the kind of thing I worry about when I'm going to bed at night. Like, it's a game I like, and it well. I'm serious about that. But people recognize tropes, and they're immediately like, oh, I know what kind of game that is, because it's got characters that I've seen or seen their like for years and years. But I don't think, like I was saying, I don't think anyone's ever seen an African-American female police officer before, so they're not necessarily going to immediately get that, but I'm hoping that we in the press can talk about it more and get people to think about it.
I hope so. And I guess maybe this is one of those times when it's it's the Christian values are influencing it maybe a bit. It's like, I want to show that like there's a lot of people in the world, and it's not just the white male that's the hero, right? It's everyone. And certainly we wanted to really showcase that. And you're right, some people might not get it. They might not. I don't want to play as though. I want to play as the Space Marine. Like maybe, but I think myself and I think the whole team as well is really proud of trying to push games and kind of characterization of heroes in a new direction that's a little more inclusive and
Sure. Is there any? I don't know if we talked about this already. I don't think so. Would you be tempted to involve religious groups as well, like for there to be a priest in it or a rabbi or something along that, or would that be walking over a line that might be a little bit too risky?
It's something we've thought of, certainly. We've talked about it, and the interesting thing is that on the one hand, we almost felt like that was a bit cliche. Because if you play Dragon Quest, you save at the church and there's priests and everything, and so on the one hand, I think people expect it. Like, RPGs is maybe the one place where there are sometimes religious overtones. Like Breath of Fire 2 at the very least had a lot, sort of that religious overtone, a lot of it. And in a way, we didn't want people to see the priest and be like, oh, I get it, yeah, he's the guy I say that, or yeah, sure, he's the funny rabbi. It's like, well, I think it almost, because of some of the preconceptions of games and how they've handled some of that, it was almost we felt would kind of give the wrong impression of what we were trying to say. Or something like, again, like the baker or the barista, like it's sort of, very much not done in games in any capacity, in some sense. I mean, so we felt like people would come to that with a bit more of a blank slate and be like, oh, well, this is the baker. Well, who's the baker? Let me see. Whereas something, like a priest and a rabbi, I think they would have a lot more. They'd bring to the game a lot more of their own sort of personal experience in life and in other games. And so we haven't, quite figured out how to bridge that, but we've talked about it a lot, but so far haven't included any of those characters in it yet.
That makes a lot of sense. I would imagine you have a lot of other stuff to worry about before you figure out how to make sure that you don't do too stereotypical of a priest without making it seem like it's not a priest, and finding that fine line. That would be quite a struggle, I'd imagine. How many different types of jobs are there so far in the game?
Well, so right now we have 20 citizens that are made, but we're planning at least 40, and they're all very different. Like, we've tried to make them all really unique. Like, you wouldn't be like, oh, I could get either of these two characters. They're kind of the same, right? So they're all very different, and some characters, the baker runs a shop, and the school teacher, you can enroll citizens in classes to kind of gain experience just as you go around and do other stuff, or you could leave the game on and go to work. Your characters level up in school, you come home and get them out. The police officer has these wanted posters that have you hunt down fugitives. Some characters will let you access new areas. And so it really is a sense of every character we tried to make very unique. Not only in battle, often I'll program totally new abilities for every character to give them a really unique sense. So it's not just, oh, he's another healer, he's another tank type thing, And again, also what we're sort of calling their world ability, which is what sort of they do in their day job when they're not in your party. Again, we tried to make it really unique and something that you really want to invest in as a player because you see the value of it. As opposed to, we play Pokemon, there's so many Pokemon, and there's not really an intrinsic reason to play them all. You kind of want to catch them, but you don't use them in your team a lot. But we kind of wanted to fix that and be like, well, there is a reason. You level up all the characters, they get better at these day jobs, they're always providing new features, new content, new items, new everything. And if you really like, one of them or a couple of them, you could really, invest in that and, build those up and have more of that kind of experience. If you like them all, you can do them all. If you like none, you can do none, and you can just kind of skip them, and that's fine. It's meant to be sort of optional and play to whatever the player kind of wants to get out of it.
Sure. It sounds a little bit, and this is to give people frame of reference, because it's always something. I want to get people to resonate with this right away so they can care about it. It sounds a little bit like the jobs in Grand Theft Auto you might take on, where it kind of changes the feel of the game for a little bit, and you have different experiences and different things you can gain from it, mixed with, like you said, Pokemon, but where instead of having 20 different fire types, there's one baker type, and that's your baker for your baker skills, so you can value each and every one as individuals instead of just seeing them in this kind of sea of characters you might collect. And then, of course, mixed with Earthbound, which really did, one of the things I loved about Earthbound was that it really paid tribute to minutia in a lot of different ways, and you enjoyed the little things about seeing American life recreated in a simple, sweet way, and was parody without being overly harsh about it. And I don't get the sense that you could ever be too harsh in your game. Have you ever had an idea for it that you thought, that might be a little bit too mean? That might be
it's funny. So a big underlying sort of theme for the game, and it's something we talk about a lot in the team, is that we really want positivity. And we don't necessarily, so you don't kind of go around and the VP is not insulting people and things like that. Even in the opening scene of the game, your mom wakes you up, and you're the main character, the vice president, he's kind of a slacker, but the mom is still like, I love you, but maybe it's time to get up. It's just a sense of, it's positivity. It's people coming together, and I think that's something that I really took from Earthbound as well. Especially when you get to I don't want to spoil the ending, I guess, if no one's played it, but you get to the end of the game, and there's this huge sense of community, and everyone's is positive and kind of working together, and it's a great feeling. And I think we wanted to really focus on the positivity, the cooperation, the sort of the teamwork, as opposed to the negative elements, and sort of derive humor out of positivity, I guess, in a way. So that's sort of definitely been kind of an overriding goal for the game.
It's freaking awesome. I love it. I'm so happy about it. Sorry, little editorial there for me. Do you have an overarching storyline planned out for the game? Because I wasn't sure if it was more about the individual experiences of all the job classes combined with the vice president's story as he comes from, waking up in the morning and doing the traditional JRPG boy getting out of bed and setting off on a great adventure of being the vice president. Whether that's going to find an end point where you can look back on everything and see it built up to some big vice presidential moment or not. Is that the direction you're headed in with it?
Yeah, we definitely do have an overarching story, and it was something that we decided early on that we did want to have that, despite a lot of the game being open in terms of, a lot of the characters are optional, a lot of optional areas. Like, we wanted to support that kind of broad gameplay for players, that they could kind of get as much out of the game as they wanted to put in terms of the content, but also recognize that, one thing I love about RPGs, is seeing the narrative through from beginning to end, and we definitely wanted to kind of preserve that, but definitely, make it a bit of a, humorous twist, especially, with the way the main character is and all the citizens you recruit. But certainly, there is sort of an overarching narrative that drives you through the game with just a ton of optional stuff that you can kind of bring into the mix as well, with all the cast of characters and all the places you can go and explore.
So it sounds like you'll get traditional RPG story. You'll get atypical recruitment, not quite Pokemon catching. How does for people who don't know, how does the recruitment process actually work?
So the recruitment, again, we tried to make it very unique per citizen. So everyone has their own thing. Like, so when you start the game, obviously you get some of the characters, your brother and your mom, pretty fast. They're kind of tutorial things, but every character we planned on having something really unique, and avoiding a lot of the, things like, oh, go kill for this monster and come back, and we think, that almost, I kind of think, devalues the reward, devalues the character you get if what you had to do is so trivial, So yeah, it is very unique. Some of them there's a lot of exploration involved. Some of them there's a lot of combat involved. Some of them have puzzle solving, or it really runs the gamut of a lot of unique things. And that, again, is kind of what we tried to do with the game. That every citizen is really unique. There's a compelling reason why you get them, a compelling sort of story about how you get them, and definitely we wanted to make that as much of the game as using them when you get them. So.
Absolutely. Is there a game developer in the game yet? That job class? Yeah,
there is the plan of having like a game developer programmer character. We haven't finished making him yet, but certainly there is the idea of bringing him into the mix. So.
Because I can't help but feel like this game, on some level, is a reflection of how you felt when you weren't at your day job. You've got all your day job, you've got all your skills, but this is the stuff you do outside of it. You get together with your friends and plan something really big, and you're doing that. You're planning a big video game. It's going to be planned for Steam right now, and potentially Wii U as well. Is that right?
Yeah. We were just accepted onto Steam, which was great. We didn't have to go through Greenlight, thankfully, so that was good. Since we'd worked with them on Waveform, so they still know us, which is good. And Nintendo has been really supportive of us so far. Like, they just sent us a Wii U dev kit, being like, "Hey, we love the game. Port it to Wii U." So that was really supportive. And certainly, I think given my own development experience on Nintendo hardware, and the fact that Earthbound, obviously, I'm sure has a lot of Nintendo fans associated with it, that felt like a pretty good match. But at the same time, we still are exploring a lot of other consoles, and I'd love it if it was playable by anyone on any console. Obviously, again, we're a small team. It's a lot of work to do those kind of ports, but it's certainly something that we're investigating and looking forward to being able to do.
And I don't think we've mentioned yet that it's on Kickstarter. I think it has 6 days to go.
6 days to go. About 75,000
to go.
To go.
So I'm going to be pushing it hard.
Okay, thank you.
I've had success helping to push games. River City Ransom Underground. Did my best to help with that, and that met its funding. Made a lot of funding in 4 days. I think it made 75,000 in that amount of time. Then Little Line 2, I recently tried to push that. That didn't get it, sadly. That was going to be a fun game. Anyway, questions came in. I'm being a jerk. I'm ignoring them. Rent Check asks, am I late to the party here? Will there be special team attacks that only unlock with certain parties, like in Suikoden and such? That's a great question, Rencheck, and you are not late to the party. Any plans for that?
Yeah, we're definitely thinking about doing things like that. One of the things we're trying to, I guess, make sure is that you don't feel overly attached to a certain party. We really want to encourage experimentation using all the characters. Again, like because they have all these benefits outside the battles, and just in the whole world at large. So we wanted to be careful not to create a situation where you get your 3 guys and they've got this uber team attack and you're just crushing everyone, because then you might not feel like, oh well, what about those other guys? What do they do? We bring them in and see how how that all compares. So it's something we're considering, but we certainly wouldn't want it to get to the point where you feel comfortable with one team because you've mastered their team attack to the exclusion of other characters. So.
Right, that makes sense. One of the things people complain about with Earthbound, we played for the first time today, is that the combat is a little bit too straightforward. The characters aren't. They're a little bit different, but they're not as like wildly different as in Pokemon, let's say. There's no rock, paper, scissors style combat where you have to play to strengths and weaknesses, just kind of, you spy a character, oh, he's weak against PK Rockin', so then you just use PK Rockin' and kills him. Is that something you're considering with the combat system, ways to make sure that it stays deep and stays fresh?
Yeah, so one of the big ways we're doing it is making sure, as I mentioned, that each citizen is very unique, and I'm coming up with brand new abilities for any of them. Like you might play a certain character and he's the only guy with certain abilities, and what I think that does, it makes him feel very unique, and that you can bring him into situations and use him in new ways, or maybe he's really good in this situation, or maybe he's not, and you can swap him out. And also the idea that again, there's so much variety amongst the citizens, whereas you get in Earthbound, you have 4 characters, and that's all you get. So you have to sort of plan every encounter around those 4 characters. Whereas in Citizens of Earth, what we're trying to do is say, every character is so unique that oftentimes I'll send the game to testers, and they'll come back and say, well, I really love this team because of this XYZ strategy. I'm like, I didn't even think of that. And because there's so much uniqueness in the characters, it's really helping that variety and making sure things stay fresh. And again, every character has some strengths and weaknesses, but a big part of the game is we didn't want you to feel like once you assemble your team that you've got all your weaknesses covered. So there always is something you're kind of lacking, and so it was always a motivation for, I should bring in that character, I should get that. And again, the game has the ability to restart any battle with a new team, so you can be like, I want to try this other team, let me restart, do it again. So there's no penalty for choosing wrong, I guess, in that sense, or wanting to change your mind. So that's sort of how we're approaching the idea of variety and uniqueness amongst the characters.
Huh, interesting. It sounds like it'll play itself well to playing maybe parts of the game over again with different party to see if you have different effects and have different experiences through that. That's a lot of fun. While you were talking, I couldn't help but think of a team attack if you do choose to use them.
Okay, all right, hit me.
If there's a butcher, he could feed the enemy turkey, and then the therapist could ask them to talk all about their childhood, which will bore them and put them to sleep.
Okay.
It'll be the tryptophan, I think it's whatever it's called, in turkey. Makes you sleepy, mixed with boring conversation, which is what therapists told me about. That could be fun. Yeah, that's an idea for you. R. Xanadu asks, I'm working on becoming a gameplay programmer via Unity 3D on non-mobile platforms, i.e. on PC. What does an entry-level position as a gameplay programmer require for someone to do? What are the general salaries for a gameplay programmer in most game development jobs? Yeah, that's a great question. I think a lot of people who like this show have some aspiration to make games themselves. So what would you advise somebody who's just getting into it with 3D, and what would they have to expect?
So I think that gameplay programmers are a bit unique amongst kind of the world of programmers, because you do have to understand why a game is fun, and you have to understand a lot of the design. Whereas if, for example, you're a render programmer, as long as you can make the game look good, I mean, you've done your job, you've got the effects, right? But a gameplay programmer needs to be able to, if they implement a feature or the way a character moves, you have to be able to play it over and over again and get a sense of, it needs to be tweaked this way, or it doesn't feel quite right. Obviously, Nintendo, they're kind of masters of that sense, I think, in the games they make, and certainly that was a big learning experience. But yeah, being able to understand where programming and design meet, I think, is sort of where the gameplay programmer lives. So you have to be, technically very smart, to be able to write the code, but also understand how everything you're doing is directly impacting what the player feels when he's, playing the game. So that's really important. So I'd recommend, in addition to just, learning programming, certainly play games, get a feel for them, and understand, just the relationship between the design and how it's implemented. And then
sorry, I gotta follow up on that. Are there any games that you've played, big or small, that you feel like the gameplay programming was probably done really well? I know composers, when they write music, they hear the music in film and games in a different way than maybe I would, because that's a place they've been in and something they've tried to create themselves. So having been a gameplay programmer, are there any games that you've been like, wow, they kept this tight, they kept this responsive, they made this work in a way that felt good to play?
A good general principle, I think, is fighting games usually get it pretty good because the gameplay is so fast. And if you read articles about how they did, like Street Fighter 2, and they're adjusting the punch by 1 pixel because that was what really felt good. I think there's a lot of that experience in fighting games because they're so fast paced and pixels matter. Whereas something I think in some ways 3D games can get away with a lot looser gameplay because there's so many more, I guess, dimensions of movement and things happening. Whereas in 2D in Mario, if you run and jump on a Goomba and it doesn't feel good, I mean, that's the whole game is running and jumping on that Goomba. If that doesn't feel good, your game, there's nothing else. Whereas if you're playing a whole, for example, Mario 64 or the 3D ones, you're running and jumping and wall climbing and you're doing all these things. So if any one element feels a bit off, it's not as noticeable.
Huh. That makes a lot of sense. And then I guess in terms of gameplay, salaries. I don't know if that's something you want to talk about. Money's always a bit touchy, but if somebody was just getting into Unity 3D and they would ask you, you think I'll be able to live off this if I get an entry-level job doing Unity gameplay?
Yeah, so all of my salaries have been in Canadian dollars, so you got to take that with a grain of salt. But yeah, I think so. Even when I was working as a student, co-op at Next Level Games, good enough salary that I could have kept living. But there's a huge range, right? Entry, certainly, even entry-level programmers, there is a strong sense of specialized skill and knowledge. So certainly, the salaries do reflect. It's not a job anyone can walk in and do. So I think even at entry level, you're getting pretty good. But again, the more you learn, the more you do, you certainly can start earning a lot more. So salaries are good. The thing you got to be careful with is overtime. In game companies, usually you work a lot of overtime for nothing. There's no overtime pay, no vacation thing. So the salary is good, but you may be working a lot. So per hour, sometimes it gets a bit funky because you're working so many hours that you aren't paid for. So the salaries are generally good, but yeah, you just got to be careful with how much overtime you're roped into. So.
I feel like a dink. I didn't ask you what games influenced you growing up other than Earthbound. That's something I almost ask everybody, because I imagine it's oftentimes the kind of person who can play games for a whole long time, who can handle programming and coding for a whole long time, because it's a similar sort of second-to-second problem solving, getting invested in an overarching goal. Some people just can't stand looking at a screen for 12 hours, but I feel like I've been trained to do that for years, but maybe you have too. So what games you liked growing up that influenced you and got you wanted to work in the industry?
Well, I'll tell you, the very first game I played on the original Nintendo was Faxanadu, or Faxanadu, I think some people pronounce it. That was a pretty cool game. And as the first game I played, I was 4 years old when I played that or something, and I was like, this is great! So I wanted to keep playing more, right? And of course, growing up with all of the original, Mario and Zelda, and I was absolutely in love with those games. And I remember I was so obsessed with Dragon Quest that before I ever got to play it, I had my Nintendo Power magazine talk about it. I used to do my own live action Dragon Quest in my backyard because I was so obsessed with that game and RPGs. So that was and Final Fantasy also on the original Nintendo, and tons of so many games, and then the jump also to Super Nintendo, and again playing like Zelda: Link to the Past is still my favorite Zelda. I think that's amazing, and Super Mario World, and again just the evolution of RPGs. Final Fantasy, Chrono Trigger, Secret of Mana, Earthbound, Ogre Battle, huge influence in certainly my love of RPGs, and Nintendo games that they made definitely influenced my ideas on the tight gameplay and high degree of polish, which I really try to do in my own games as well.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. And do you ever see the Dragon Warrior cartoon?
I don't think I did.
I have to watch it. Here in Massachusetts, where I live, in the United States, nobody liked Dragon Warrior. Dragon Quest wasn't a big deal. Dragon Ball wasn't on yet. But if you got up at 4:30 in the morning on a channel called Channel 56, you could watch the best cartoon ever, which is Dragon Warrior, based on, I think, Dragon Quest III.
Okay.
Animation by Akira Toriyama, so it looks like the game, and it looks like Dragon Ball, and it's mind-blowingly good. At least for me it was when I was 12. So I'll find that for you.
Okay.
Mr. Jettinger, I can't believe I'm not pronouncing your name right, Jared. I'm sorry. Jared's a great guy. He lives locally. We've hung out a few times. He asks, have you considered contacting Joe Biden to voice act as a stretch goal? That could be pretty good.
Yeah, I think it's probably worth an email. I get the sense he might be busy, but
how about past vice presidents? I don't think Dan Quayle's doing anything.
Yeah.
He's the United States vice president.
Yeah.
Years ago, George Bush. Do you have a favorite American vice president?
Vice president? I gotta be honest. I don't know a lot of American vice presidents. I don't know how much airtime they get in the United States. Certainly in Canada, they don't show up. At least in my sphere of media, I don't know. Presidents, yeah. Vice presidents, not so much.
I'll give you a quick rundown. There was Dan Quayle, who was famous for misspelling potato. He spelled it like potato, T-O-E.
Right. Who's the guy that shot someone when he was hunting quail? Was that someone or
you can definitely get him. Yeah, that was Bush's vice president, Dick Cheney.
That was pretty good.
He looked like I don't know if you ever watched the Bionic Six. It's a cartoon show. It's really good. It's another show I have to send you.
Yeah.
The villain was named Dr. Scarab, who was this bald, yellowish green ogre man. It's we'll get you for that, right. Bionic Six. Just always evil and giggling. That's what poor Dick Cheney was like in the American media. Anyway, sorry, I'm off on a tangent. Kev has a question. What is your schedule like? Is it endless 12 to 16-hour days, or do you do the standard 9 to 5? Yeah, when it's your lifeblood, your business, and you have people now in your party, you're kind of the vice president. You've got these people with special skills underneath you that their livelihood might depend on how well you do. What does that put on pressure for you to put in hours? What's that been like?
I try to maintain sort of a 9 to 5. Back when I was working on Waveform, between working a full-time job at Next Level and then doing Waveform another 40 hours a week, evenings and weekends, and then even when I quit Next Level, it was close to when I was shipping Waveform. I was working a ton, and during all that, I got married. So now that I'm working at Citizens of Earth, I'm trying to be a little more, I guess, responsible in that sense of my wife comes home and I try to spend time with her and not just sitting away making games all the time. But certainly, that being said, again, like I mentioned before, a lot of things will fall through the cracks that it's kind of left up to me to do. So I do find myself wearing a lot of hats and doing a lot of things, and sometimes I will work 50 hours a week, 60, but it's not bad. And again, it's the kind of thing where I'm working on my own game, and so where other people will be like, oh great, it's Saturday, I'm gonna relax and play a game, or I'm gonna go do something that I enjoy. For me, I enjoy making games, and so it's not always. Sometimes it is, it always is hard work, and sometimes it's tedious, frustrating work, but sometimes it really is enjoyable and fun, and certainly I think there's that element that makes it not quite as bad as it might seem sometimes.
Mm-hmm. How would you say it compares to playing a game, between making a game and playing a game? What are the similarities and differences?
I mean, in general, playing a game is more fun in a sense, like where your only responsibility is that to enjoy it. But making a game can be really fun in a different way, which is, taking something that you've just imagined and seeing it come to life in a game and being able to play something of your own design and be like, wow, that was really fun and that's exciting. I think that creates almost maybe a level of enjoyment that goes beyond what you get from playing a game. So sometimes, I'd say on average it's more fun to play a game, but you kind of get these really cool highs for making a game and seeing your own kind of vision come to life that is, really kind of unrivaled maybe in just playing a game.
That makes sense. I would imagine that the highs are very high and the lows are very low when you make a game. So in some ways it's the same sort of activity where you're solving problems, you're have an overarching goal, and you're working towards something, but it's your actual life that you're playing as opposed to like the simulation.
The stakes are much higher. So.
Well, that sounds really exciting. We're heading towards the end of the show. We have about 4 minutes left. Is there anything in there that you wanted people to know about Citizens of Earth, or maybe you could talk more about Waveform? We didn't talk much about that at all, unfortunately. Or anything else that you wanted to just open door on? Anything to talk about in the last few minutes?
Well, I will say one thing. Now, so fans of Destructoid probably know Dale North, and what you may not know that I didn't know that he made remixes of Earthbound music sometime back in the day. I used one of his remixes in my wedding from Earthbound, and so
Does Dale know that?
I told him on Twitter one time. I said, hey, are you the Dale North that made this song? And he's like, yeah, I am. And I was like, I used it in my wedding. So I don't know if he knows that that's me, Ryan, making Citizens of Earth, but so yeah, to me that's the great intersection of Destructoid and Earthbound and me and Citizens of Earth is that's kind of where it all comes together in a pretty cool way. So.
Oh, that's touching.
Yeah.
Dale is such an interesting guy. He is a multi-talented. He's a good writer. He's a good manager. But he started off with the one-ups, at least as far as I know. That was one of his first things he did in the video game world, and hugely successful with the one-ups and just good at remixes in general. He did the music for an RPG coming out called Dragon Fantasy II, I believe it's called.
Really? He did that?
Yeah, he did the music for that. Just in his spare time between being the Destructoid boss and going to Tokyo Game Show and all the stuff that he has to do as a member of Destructoid. Yeah, interesting guy. If you ever want to hire him to do music, he might be available between all of his projects.
Right, yeah. So yeah, that's a fun story. But yeah, just in general, I mean, between Waveform and Citizens of Earth, they both really represent me trying to do something really different. Certainly, Waveform was make a game that no one had played before. Citizens of Earth is sort of the same high-level idea, but with, I guess, more of the sort of in the box of RPGs. And we being a long 20-year fan of RPGs, I kind of have had tons of ideas about what I could do, and certainly I think it represents that unique twist on an RPG in a lot of ways that I think RPGs kind of need. We're doing a lot of things where, of course, random encounters gone, unique characters, they're in, and, we're pushing a lot of, cool, graphical effects, especially in 2D, you don't see very often. And I think, so both games are sort of me trying to push the boundaries of, game design in kind of new ways, and I hope people, appreciate it and can, really resonate with playing a politician and playing these games that are very different than what you might expect, but, yeah, it's been great, having the ability to make them, and yeah, I really hope people enjoy playing them.
Yeah, me too. I hope that because people are ready for an Earthbound type RPG now. I don't think they were ready for it when Earthbound came out, which is part of the problem. But these days, people want that kind of focus on ideas and fun, but not so heavy. RPGs got heavier and heavier and heavier with longer and longer battles and longer cutscenes. This is a direct, lighthearted, positive, funny, beautifully drawn, very nice artwork in the game. It reminds me a little bit of if Mad Magazine was cleaner and brighter and made me smile instead of like maybe feel a little dirty. Yeah, it's a great looking game. I hope people check it out. They can follow you on Twitter. You're at Eden Industries.
That's right. Yeah.
And they can check you out. They can check the game out on Kickstarter.
Yes.
And they can play Waveform now on Steam. Is that right?
Yeah, Waveform's on Steam. Yeah, that's right. And then, a bunch of other places. Humble Store has it if you want the DRM free version. But Steam's pretty ubiquitous, so I'm sure you can find it on there.
Yeah, everyone loves that Steam. We barely talked about Waveform, but you should look into it yourself. See if you like it. I like it.
Yeah, good.
Trying to think anything else. Anything else you wanna? Anywhere else they should look for you, or is that about everything?
You can follow, Facebook. We have updates as well. Facebook, Twitter, just our website. We have, a bunch of kind of more in-depth information about the game. And in some ways, you want to dive in a bit. But yeah, check out the Kickstarter. Back it if you're feeling generous, or at the very least, check out the videos and the demo that's on the Kickstarter page. So,
free demo, fun to play. As for me, I'm at TronNots on Twitter. You can follow me if you want. I don't care at all, to be honest. But, do that if you'd like to. And reruns of the show are on iTunes. Just Google Sup Holmes iTunes. We're on to like 74 or 75 now? We're going on a long time. What else? On Destructoid's YouTube channel, you can watch the reruns as well. And next week we're having Marcus Lindblom. I think I pronounced his last name wrong. He was the localizer and partial translator and also some content creation for Earthbound. Of all things. He's, you think he worked on Halo 4 as well?
Wow.
He's been in the industry for so long. Yeah, he's had quite oh, wait a minute. Or maybe not. We'll see. Someone's telling, I'm getting a message from Sinistar that we are not doing a show next week, so we'll have to wait and find out. Exciting. Well, thanks so much for being on the show, Ryan.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thank you very much.